what is the one thing that people miss or they just need to know about this topic that can give them a massive amount of positive direction in their brain health?
Anything you can do to lower inflammation will help you. So how do we downregulate the inflammation in our body? We can do many practices. You've got hyperbaric oxygen therapy, you've got IVs, exercise helps with that, sleep. I really love to get back to Mother Nature's gift. I'm sleeping well, I'm exercising, I'm hydrating, and I'm eating a good nutritious diet. So you're not just feeding your brain cells, you're helping with cell membrane fluidity and downregulating inflammation.
Louisa, thank you so much for coming out from New York to do this with me. This is just so fantastic to have you.
I'm just so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I've heard you on many podcasts, and you also have a podcast, and your deep knowledge of neurophysiology is just astounding. I mean, like, everyone needs to know this information, and I'm so incredibly grateful for you to join us so we can put this in front of more people, right?
I'm so excited to be here. And you're right, this is something, I call it public education, something I've been doing probably for the last 10 years now.
That is awesome. So just so the audience knows from your own words, because the introductions are your accolades and your resume, but in your own words, what do you consider yourself an expert at? And what are you the most passionate about?
So I consider myself an expert, I would say, in neurology, which is the study of the brain and the nervous system. I was an elite triathlete back in Australia, so I very much learned what high performance is, what human physiology is, and the role that exercise plays in our overall health. Now I'm very much heavily involved in the prevention of age-related diseases, such as Alzheimer's disease, but with a specific focus of exercise. So exercise and its impact on the brain.
So much incredible research that's come out in the last few years, last decades, where if we had known this information decades ago, I don't think we'd be anywhere near in the crisis of Alzheimer's that we're seeing nowadays.
Oh, look, I mean, that's what we're going to get into because we did have the knowledge. Actually, it was in 1960, and we'll go into the evolution of this entire field. But we had the knowledge, but it's about why are we not getting access to that knowledge?
I'm so passionate about this topic, just to kind of veer off course here a little bit, because, thank God for the distribution of this microphone, right? Because now we have things like podcasts and social media where we're not just fed the knowledge from the government or from, the authorities that be or the mass media, which is all under the control of, the people that fund them, right?
Yeah.
The people that donate to the government, the people that fund the mass media, that buy the advertising. And I really feel like we've lost decades in the advancement of our knowledge of health and just, the health of our civilization because we did not have access to this knowledge. And now doing things like you're doing on your podcast where you're educating people directly, finally we have the ability to really educate people on how to have a better health, right?
I call it the free press.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting because if we get our information, and by our, I mean a lot of the population are getting their information from the CDC guidelines, which would state in physical activity terms that we need to be doing at least 150 minutes to 300 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity. I would change that. I'm trying to lobby against that right now. But if we're getting all of our health information from the government, and the government is, funded from the pharmaceutical industry, the 5 food conglomerates, and the military-industrial complex, then there's a misalignment there.
Yeah, massive misalignment. And we saw that, from starting with the food pyramid or even before, like you said, the 1960s, like massive misalignment in the information that we've been given. And that's what led to this epidemic of sickness and then obviously Alzheimer's, which is something that you specialize in. But just in general, too, it's not just about Alzheimer's. It's just so many people walk around feeling like their brain is broken, like they have brain fog, like they're just not functioning optimally.
Yeah.
And it starts with that, right?
It does. And let's just take a bit of a neuroanatomy course right now so everyone can feel how I'm feeling. Yeah. We have a brain and it sits inside our skull, and it's pretty much, it's 2 pounds, and it kind of feels like hard jello. Did you ever during residency, did you ever go in and you saw the brain? And it's marvelous, right? It's beautiful, and it's the most vascular-rich organ in the entire body. It's made up of 100 billion cells. Each cell, which we call neurons, have around 5,000 connections. They all communicate with each other. So we've got this huge network in our brain. So you've got to think that's around 500 trillion connections occurring at any given moment. And these connections are responsible for how we think, how we feel, how we act. And if we lose these connections, which we do over time, that's what happens. It's either part of the natural brain aging process, but we can accelerate it, or we can slow the progression. Now, as we lose these connections, we get brain fog, we get decreased information processing speed, and we start to think about it, and we think, oh, I'm just tired today. And you don't pick up on the symptom. But I have an analogy, and it kind of fits a lot of the CEOs that probably are listening to this and executives. Our brain networks like compound interest. One night of bad sleep might not do anything. One drink of alcohol may not do anything. It's the accumulation and the accumulation that ends up leading to the decline in our network.
Yeah, that's very well taken. And I think it's important for people to know, from your perspective as a neurophysiologist, can this be stopped and potentially even reversed? Can we regain those connections?
Yes. And I'm so happy you said regain those connections, because we cannot, so we've got the neuron cell body, right? It's just like the neuron is just like a cell in the rest of our bodies. But the thing that makes it special is it's got this little leg that comes off it. And then these little branches, as I mentioned, they're called dendrites, and they are the connections. Those we can preserve, those we can grow new ones, those we can reverse. We can't really grow new brain cells. That's called adult neurogenesis. That occurs only in specific areas of the brain.
Really?
Yeah, only in the hippocampus.
The hippocampus is where memories are formed.
Yeah, that's a seahorse-shaped structure deep within the temporal lobes that sit behind the ears, very deep, and that's responsible for holding our memory formation, our learning. And coincidentally, it's the first thing to go during Alzheimer's disease. It shrinks. But what we've seen, which we'll go into a lot of the studies around exercise, is during exercise, especially aerobic, we grow the volume of the hippocampus. We grow new brain cells within that area. So yes, we can slow the progression of the loss, but we can also grow new connections.
That's so encouraging to hear. And we're going to get into all the habits around that and the techniques around that. So if you were to look at the body of information that you talk about with people, what is the one thing that people miss or they just need to know about this topic that can give them a massive amount of positive direction in their brain health?
I think I would categorize it as anything you can do to lower inflammation will help you. And I'll tell you why. I'm in the study of exercise. We'll go into it, specifically resistance training. We're going to go into that. But at the seat of, I believe, of chronic disease is inflammation. So how do we downregulate the inflammation in our body? We can do many practices. We're in the Next Health studio. You mentioned that you've got hyperbaric oxygen therapy, you've got IVs, exercise helps with that, sleep. I really love to get back to Mother Nature's gifts. I think we've lost track, and what I see is a lot of people implementing accessory items, right? Now, I live in New York City, so I'm in an apartment, and right in the heart of Manhattan, I have an ice bath in my apartment. I consider this an accessory item. I give myself permission to use that because I'm doing the Mother Nature's gifts. I'm sleeping well, I'm exercising, I'm hydrating, and I'm eating a good, nutritious diet.
That's such an important point to highlight on, because I see a lot of patients, so do you, and the first question is always, I want to start doing the hyperbaric oxygen chamber, how many minutes
cheat
in the
code.
sauna, right? The cheat codes, right? And then I ask, well, how's your sleep? And they're like, I have no idea. I think I sleep 4 to 5, maybe 6 hours a night. Like we're not going to get into any of that until we figure out what's going on with your sleep.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. You have to focus in on the big rocks, right? Let's get the big rocks first before we kind of go down that rabbit hole. And fine, once you get your big rocks in order, the rabbit hole is incredible. It's fun. It's inspiring to do these things, but
yeah.
yeah.
And look, the one thing that you've probably learned throughout your time, one of the most important things when you bring on a new client or a patient is something called patient history.
Right.
And I really love getting into this because I need to understand your behavior. And a great coach, which is what I consider myself right now, a human performance coach, a great coach can really understand. It's someone who can understand your behavior and be able to modify it, because you can know everything, but without adherence to these protocols, you're not going to get anywhere. It's even for me, I know so much, even down to a molecular level. But if I don't sleep, then I'm not sleeping.
Right.
So it's about how can we modify your behavior so you can implement these protocols so you can get the effects.
Yeah. So what is your feeling on, you see a lot of patients that are coming to you because they have a concern about brain health, or perhaps they want to like optimize their brain, right? The ones that have a concern about their brain health, what are they most struggling with?
You know, I generally see people over the age of 40. I hate bringing in age, but it's that point. And what we see in the literature, look, I'm not at that stage yet in my life. But what I see in the literature is that things go downhill at age 40. So
and that's my
scary.
personal story.
Yeah.
When I turned 40, things were at the lowest of the low.
Yeah,
So
and we
I
see
remember.
that.
Yep.
We see it as it relates to brain health, muscle mass, muscle strength. So I'm generally getting people at around 42 to 47, 48. They're coming to me with, Louisa, I just am not thinking as fast as what I used to. I'm not sleeping well. I'm trying, but I'm waking up during the night. So it's usually along the lines of thinking, processing speed, fatigue. I don't have as much energy as what I used to. Now, I understand as humans at age 40, you've got your job, maybe you run a really successful business, you've got a husband or a wife, you've got kids. So that plays into it as well. But it is generally around that age group.
Yeah. My feeling is I think a lot of people think just genetically that's what's supposed to happen. Well, my feeling is that our bodies are so resilient that we're building up these bad habits, routines, and just toxic exposures and lack of exercise and all of these things from our teen years all the way up into our 20s, past our 30s. And then finally at 40, we've accumulated so much damage that now we're starting to feel the effects of this accumulated damage that happens at a much younger age, actually.
Oh, 100%. And we know this and recognize this from Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is it's not time stamped in your 70s, but that's when you'll get diagnosed. However, we know that it's the accumulation of the last 30 years. And these diseases start in your 20s and in your 30s, but they don't seem to have an effect until we get into our late 60s and early 70s.
Yeah, that's so true. And so for any 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds listening to this podcast, or even if you have a 20-year-old child, I think it's so incredibly important to get your life in order at this age, right? You're not as resilient as you think you are. And especially on the aspect of building good habits that last for the rest of your life, like now's the time to get your diet, your sleep, and your exercise routine in order.
Yeah, correct. It's about learning, like you said. Where can I get the education from? How can I get off social media? Social media it's both good and bad. I think we have access to great information, but we also have access to misinformation.
Right, absolutely. I want to go back to the anatomy of the brain, because I think a lot of people, when they come to see me as a patient, their first question is, should we measure my neurotransmitters? And what can I do about my neurotransmitters, right? And it's a little bit frustrating to me, to be honest with you, because I think that you as well, right?
Yes.
I think that there's so much talk about neurotransmitters and serotonin and dopamine that really people forget that that's kind of like the end of what we need to be talking about as far as treatment modalities go. And yes, we're definitely going to be working on your dopamine, your serotonin, of course, through all the different health habits we put into place. But there's not a supplement that's going to help you that reverse, years of damage to your brain. And so I wanted to kind of focus in on that. Like, how do you How do you talk to people about their neurotransmitters, and where does that fit in the entire flow of brain health?
Well, I mean, that's a very specific question because a neurotransmitter is just a chemical messenger. Right. That's all it is. These messenger molecules that get released between the two cells. And when they synapse, when they meet, that's all it is. That's what the communication is. And during different diseases, such as Parkinson's disease, if you will, we have a lower efficacy of dopamine in a different area of the brain. So measuring neurotransmitters is very much talking about the functionality of the brain. So going back to neuroanatomy. So we have a structural component, which is the makeup of the brain. We've got 4 lobes and a 5th cerebellum, if you will. The functionality of the brain is how well are the neurons connecting? How well are they firing together? How well are they releasing these neurotransmitters? And we can manipulate those through lifestyle interventions. We can't just take a hit of serotonin. We can't just take a hit of dopamine. I mean, you could. It's a medication called carbidopa-levodopa, which is, a medication specifically for Parkinson's disease. But we're not just going to give the average person some levodopa. So it's very much just understanding, taking a back seat and understanding that if we have a network in our brain, just like we do like a computer, it needs to be charged and it needs to be fueled to produce these neurotransmitters or chemicals.
Yeah, makes total sense. And I think it's important for people to realize that neurons communicate in many ways. Neurotransmitter is one way. They have direct connections, which communicate through electrical impulses. And I think that brain health is really focusing on the brain as an entirety rather than just one specific neurotransmitter. Do you agree with that?
And the best thing about this is, I mentioned earlier, it's the most vascular rich organ in the entire body. When I say that, that means it is rich with blood vessels. Now, we've got 3 specific types, right? We've got arteries, capillaries, and veins. Right. And the arteries are these big pumps, if you will, and they contain, the walls of the arteries have muscles, right? So we need to protect those. Then we've got these little capillaries, and they are 1-cell thick vessels. They don't have the muscles that the arteries have. So these tiny little vessels, which are supplying the brain with blood, are so important, but coincidentally, they are the first ones to go when we have hypertension. Now, I don't know if you've read the SPRINT trial around hypertension. Now, hypertension is elevated blood pressure. Not just once, because we get elevated blood pressure during exercise. It's a continuum. So if we constantly have elevated blood pressure, which many people in the United States have, we kill off these little capillaries. And what happens when we do that? We kill off blood supply to specific areas of the brain. And then if we do that, we then kill the neurons in that area. And then over time, you think, well, Louisa, you said 100 billion neurons. That's why it takes a long time. Mm-hmm. And guess what? You're killing them during your 20s through sleep deprivation, through cigarette smoke. I don't know, what are the kids doing these days? They're smoking marijuana. Are they vaping now? Yeah. Thank God that wasn't around when I was growing up. They're vaping now, and they're not realizing, well, it's not affecting me. I feel great. We all felt great. I remember having, in my early 20s, I remember having a glass of wine or 2 or whatever I was drinking back then, and then actually competing the next day in triathlon and, getting a podium finish. Now, if I have a glass of wine now, it's like I need 3 days to recover. Yeah. It's a very different experience. So that's what happens. You kill blood supply to one specific area of the brain, and then it accumulates and it accumulates. And once you kill that area of the brain, every area of the brain is mapped out. And a really great task for everyone to do is just go on Google and type in the word homunculus. The human homunculus basically gives you a representation of your brain. And, this area is responsible for hand movement. This area is responsible for leg movement. So if you start to kill off little areas of the brain, you see dysfunctions in different areas of the body. That's how I love people to think about it. It's all about blood flow. It's all about vessel protection.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought up the point of hypertension, because this is something that I love to talk about as well. And I don't think people realize that for every 10 points you are away from 120/70, I think this was determined in the SPRINT trials, that there's a 10% chance of increase mortality. But that's through all forms of disease. So brain, kidneys, just many different cardiac disease. And so diagnosing high blood pressure as early as possible in your life. And I see people in their 20s with high blood pressure, actually. I just saw somebody
Hereditary?
Yes, I think it's hereditary. His whole family is at it. But also this is someone that's living on ultra-processed food and not sleeping and, all these things. Really high functioning individual, but not focusing on his body at all. And so I see this at a much younger age now too. So diagnosing it early and treating it early, I think, is key with high blood pressure. And, when I was 20, I didn't think I was even going to check my blood pressure until I was 50.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
And look, I mean, it's more than just going and getting an ACE inhibitor, right? It's so what I have for my parents back home, I'm the CEO of their health. Yes. So we have, I've taught them how to take their blood pressure because I think you can get a lot of false positives with the automatic blood pressure cuffs. But you just, you sit there, you take it first thing in the morning and have a chart and basically use it as a plot, like a plotting system. And over time, you can see a trend. Am I trending upwards? And then that's when you want to really take a step back, maybe talk to your physician and think, hey, listen, over the last 3 months, I seem to be trending upwards with my blood pressure. You want to see a linear line. You really want to be 120 over 80 or 120 over 70.
Exactly. So such great advice. So one of the paradigms I use with my patients, because there's so much information out there, is the wellness wheel. And the wellness wheel is 12 aspects of your health, starting with the basics of health, then moving on to disease, and then moving on to functional medicine, which I'm hugely passionate about. And I'd love to kind of go through some of these aspects of health and get your advice on how this relates specifically to brain health, because every system of our body is interconnected. And when you make improvements in one, you'll see improvements in the other. Things like hormonal health affect your brain health. Your level of toxin exposure affects your brain health. So I wanted to kind of dive into all of those in order with you, just so we can have like a complete discussion around brain health. So with that, I'd like to start off with nutrition. So, I think there's so many questions around what are the brain superfoods and these types of questions. And I'd love to get your perspective on how you talk about addressing nutrition in relationship to brain health.
Oh gosh, I love this. When I first started advocating for neuronutrition, what is the good things that what does your brain need to survive? I was seeing a lot of misinformation. So we're going to cover that. So first of all, what's the brain made of? I said it's 2 pounds. Now it's a hungry organ. 2 pounds, but it consumes 20% of the total calories that you consume. So it's a hungry organ. It's a big engine. What's it made of? It's made of water and fat. Now, just because it's made of fat and lipids, right, and cholesterol, it doesn't mean it takes up cholesterol, right? So it doesn't mean when you eat a steak or saturated fat or any type of cholesterol molecules cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. So if it's made of fats, then what type of fats does it consume? 20% of the total lipid components of the brain is made of DHA. DHA comes from omega-3 fatty acids. The fatty acids we find in fatty fish such as salmon and mackerel. So it's made of 3 parts, EPA, DHA, and ALA. So one thing your brain not only wants but needs to survive, and I'm talking survival of our neurons, is DHA. So supplementing, and by the way, supplementing I am I'm an advocate for, because we cannot get the recommended dosage, which is 4 grams a day, 2 grams of EPA, 2 grams of DHA. We cannot get that from fatty fish because you have to be eating pounds of it, right? So first and foremost—
And if you're vegetarian too.
Exactly. Yeah. First and foremost, you want to be having high quality EPA, DHA. In terms of timing, I like to get all of my clients doing 2 grams in the morning and 2 grams at night. Coincidentally, this has enormous effects on inflammation as well. It can really downregulate inflammation. So you're not just feeding your brain cells, you're helping with cell membrane fluidity and downregulating inflammation. So if you want a high-performing brain, you need to know that you need to feed it well, you need to fuel it. That's the first nutrient. The second one, believe it or not, your brain loves antioxidants. The brain cells love antioxidants. These are found in polyphenols, such as berries. I love berries. Every single day, it's like a requirement. It's like, have I had my blueberries? Yeah, so it loves blueberries. It loves blackberries. It loves selenium. Selenium comes from like Brazil nuts. It loves vitamin E and vitamin A. So making sure that you're getting high doses of antioxidants throughout the day. So any type of berry. What else does it love? Well, it loves water. And now we mentioned earlier this synapse, this electrical impulse that occurs. Do you know what happens during that electrical impulse? We have something called a sodium-potassium pump.
Sure.
So what does that mean? Our brain needs electrolytes to communicate. Electrolytes such as sodium, potassium, selenium, magnesium. These things we lose during sweat, so we have to replenish it. But we also just need it for the proper functioning of our brain. I like to do this by having like a sachet of Element, every LMNT. Great, it's got 2,000 milligrams of sodium, I think 100 milligrams of potassium. So I'm having electrolytes throughout the day. I'm completely hydrating. Now, this is where you come in because I'm having a lot of water throughout the day. I'm really like bullish on my water. Like I make sure I've got high quality water. But I love IVs.
Yeah.
It's like a cheat code, right, to becoming hydrated. So you want to make sure that you're being hydrated. Now, another component is creatine. Now, we make creatine, okay? It helps with cell energy metabolism. And I think this is another thing that we've gone wrong in the medical society, the science society of educating people on creatine. I see a lot of females scared of creatine. I see a lot of men thinking, my hair's going to fall out. I'm going to have kidney issues. There's been no known cases, by the way. That's just a myth right now. Creatine, to be uptaken in the brain, to get the cognitive performance aspect, if you really want a high-performing brain, having 10 to 12 grams of creatine per day is going to show enormous benefits. We have something in neurology or in medicine called insults, right? Maybe you'll get a post-traumatic insult. That's a term used in football where you will get knocked to the head.
Right.
You insult your brain. Somebody said on Instagram to me a week ago. This actually protects with those insults. Now, insults are not just knocks to the heads or a stroke. We get insults from bad sleep. You're affecting your brain.
Right.
So you can have a protective mechanism approach by having creatine in your diet.
How many grams of creatine do you recommend?
For the brain, 10 to 12. If you're doing overall performance, I would say start with 5 grams a day. But you have to get it to cross the blood-brain barrier and be uptaken by the neurons. So the randomized control trials show 10 to 12.
10 to 12 grams of creatine. So, and for those of you who don't do creatine right now, like you were just saying, men and women should be doing it. Yeah. And it's really easy to just add a scoop or two in your morning coffee.
Flavorless. My dad, in 2019, he had a right parietal lobe stroke. And so now I've got him on 10 to 12 grams of creatine. Mum puts it in his coffee every morning. He doesn't taste it.
Yeah, that's the best way to do it. And so I'm not a big supplement pusher myself, but I think, creatine is one of the baseline supplements that almost everyone should be considered to be taking. Same with like the omega-3s. And with omega-3s, are you an advocate of doing any testing around that?
Yeah. So using the omega-3 index, which was formulated by Dr. Bill Harris, this is a measure of omega-3 in the red blood cell. It's really cheap, really easy to order this test. It's a pinprick test. And I have everyone doing it. And it basically gives you a percentage. I think it goes up to maybe 14 or 16. And the risk factors for actually all-cause mortality, they now have said that low omega-3 is a risk factor for all-cause mortality. A low omega-3 status of 4% or below. Surprisingly, most of the United States fall within that line. So you want an omega-3 status of at least 8%. Mine is 10.5. I just tested it a few months ago. I'm trying to get it to 14. So I've seen improvements. We've had people come on board with a 6% and we've raised it with 4 grams a day to like an 8.5% in the matter of about 6 months. Wow. So you can raise it, yeah.
And with supplementation usually?
With supplementation, correct.
And you mentioned an EHA, DHA ratio of like 1-to-1 in the
Yeah.
supplement. So that's kind of something that people should be looking for as well.
Yeah, and you can get now there is a caveat here, and I'll put it out there. There was a study that came out that showed an association. I debunked this study, but it showed an association between omega-3s and atrial fibrillation. Now, we know that the EPA component can act as a blood thinner, okay? And so you want to be careful with this, and you can get higher doses of DHA. It's like I believe Thorne does a great one where you can get like an accelerated form of DHA. So if you do have any family history of AFib, maybe you want to clear it with your doctor. Maybe you just want to be taking a high dose of DHA as opposed to the EPA. But look, from what we found in my team of analysts when we debunked this study was that it was a very like tiny percentage.
For sure. And I believe there's huge studies out, like you said, showing that having a good level of EPA, DHA is actually protective.
More beneficial.
Right,
yeah.
exactly, to your just all-cause mortality. And for people that don't know what all-cause mortality is, it's a sum of all the reasons that people die.
Correct.
Heart, brain, kidney, every organ, metabolic disease, all of it. So you're potentially helping along all forms of disease. Right?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So also, you mentioned inflammation earlier. What's your feeling around, dietary causes of inflammation, specifically related to like ultra-processed food?
Oh gosh,
and brain health?
So I was trying to understand as well for everybody, like what is the difference between processed and ultra-processed? Well, processed foods apparently are anything that is not coming from the ground or a tree. So ultra-processed are the fried foods, the deep fried foods. I still don't understand why. Like, it surprises me when I hear people having ultra-processed foods. So it is contributing to inflammation on a very, very detrimental level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultra-processed food is, in my definition of it, is basically anything that's put together in a food factory with chemicals and a list of ingredients.
Oh, yeah.
And I think a lot of people are exposed to ultra-processed food because, number one, 90% of the real estate of a supermarket is devoted to ultra-processed food. As the entire center of the entire supermarket is boxed, canned, refrigerated food items, right?
Correct.
Filled with chemicals that are causing an incredible amount of inflammation. And then everything in fast food, many restaurants, their food comes from the supermarket centers. So they are serving you ultra-processed food combinations. And so it's a massive amount of exposure to this. And the minute I put someone on a no ultra-processed food diet, I don't care about, how much protein you're getting, I do care about it, but we don't even talk about that initially. Just eliminating the ultra-processed food, we will literally see their inflammatory levels go down to normal levels just by eliminating that one thing.
Is that measured via CRP, or are you doing other
CRP,
forms? Yeah.
We do measure other forms too, like interleukin levels, but the simplest way to do it is with CRP.
Correct. Yeah. And you're getting it below a 2.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Below a 1
below
is where
1.
we like to see it.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's complete. That's something that I think is not a lot of people still understand. I've got, some of my closest girlfriends who have got nothing to do with the health space. For some reason, I've got a lot of friends who are lawyers. But
New York.
Yeah, it's exactly New York. And even my closest friends still don't understand the detriments of ultra-processed food. So I can only imagine what the larger population is thinking.
Yeah, it's incredible, the lack of education around this. And I'm, once again, thank goodness for podcasts that we're talking about this now. Okay, I want to move on to one of your favorite topics, which is exercise and movement and brain health. And I'd love for you to dive in maybe some research that you've seen lately around this and just overall recommendations as far as a protocol for anybody to put into their lifestyle. Specifically, not specifically, but I would say especially after the age of 40. Like where does one take their exercise routine? You being a former triathlete, like this is right up your alley. So I'd love to hear more from you.
Well, how many hours do you have? Now, I'll try and accelerate this because this is my area of expertise. So when we think about exercise, I want everybody right now listening to reframe what they think about it, because it shouldn't be something that we consider, okay, I have to go and exercise. It should be part of our daily hygiene, just like when you brush your teeth. Now, exercise can be categorized into 3 forms. We've got aerobic, we've got resistance training, and then we've got neurocognitive training. Aerobic training. So this, we knew the benefits of aerobic training on the brain back in 1960 when Marianne Diamond actually did the first study on mice. And what she did was she took mice and she put one group into a box and she put them in an enriched environment, wheel running. They had mazes to go through. Really, she called it like a wonderland, right? Then the other one, the other cohort, if you will, they were just in a box with nothing, kind of like a really depressive environment. Over the next 6 months, she found that the neurons in the brains of the mice who were in an enriched environment, they were bigger. Okay, so the brain was bigger, volume size, both grey matter and white matter, and she saw that they had improved connections. Okay, I keep saying the word connections, and she saw that it was because A, they were in an enriched environment, B, they had access to a wheel. They were running nonstop, okay, for 6 months. During that running, they produced something called BDNF, Brain-Derived Neurotropic Factor. It is a growth factor for the brain. It's a hormone. Now, your brain needs trophic support, and trophic support comes from hormones. We need it. We need testosterone for brain health. We need estrogen for brain health. We need BDNF. BDNF is responsible for the growth and proliferation of neurons and the connections. So that's when we first knew about aerobic training. So guys, aerobic training, which consists of doing, I like to categorize it as zone 2. That's around 65% of your maximum heart rate. You can do this by getting a VO2 max test done. I don't know if you do them at Next Health, they're great. They're extremely excruciating and hard. You just need to do it maybe once a year, right? But during that, we can get so much information on you. We can get your peak respiratory fitness, your peak VO2 max. We can get your zone 2 level. And basically zone 2 people are in that zone of I'm working for it, but I can also carry out a conversation. That's all aerobic training needs to do. You're doing so many benefits for the brain, but one is you are releasing BDNF.
Yeah, BDNF is so important. I wish there was actually like a test that we could test for BDNF levels in people.
I've tried. Gabrielle and I have actually, we were thinking like, how do we measure it, during exercise, during, maximal exercise, and then how can we possibly inject it? And it turns out there's many pharmaceutical companies trying to invent an IV or a push IV of BDNF.
Wow.
They just can't do it.
Cross the brain-blood barrier.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
There's something else that happens that I want to point out during aerobic exercise. Now, we mentioned that all our organs communicate with each other. What's good for the heart is good for the brain. When we are engaging in aerobic activity, we're remodeling our entire cardiac system. So it turns out that as we age, we see changes in our heart. Right, the chambers of our heart change. Specifically, 2 things happen. We get stiffening of the arteries, and we get this thing. We have a right and a left ventricle, and we get left ventricular hypertrophy that occurs. So our left ventricle supplies the body, the organs with blood. Our right ventricle pumps deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Our left ventricle, therefore, we want it to be open and big, and we want a lot of blood to infiltrate it because that means more blood flow to the entire body, more blood flow to the brain. Since it tightens up and it gets smaller because the left ventricle gets thicker, we have less blood supply. It turns out that during maximal aerobic fitness or during maximal aerobic exercise, over the course of 2 years, you can remodel your heart and you can reverse the age-related decline. And actually, Ben Levine, he's a cardiologist, what he did was he did a study of 53 50-year-olds. He subjected them to 4 hours of maximal exercise per week. And over the course of 2 years, now that's a lot, but over the course of 2 years, he examined these hearts and he found that these 50-year-old hearts reversed their heart age by 20 years.
Incredible.
So they had 30-year-old hearts just from exercise alone. So you could say that exercise is medicine,
right?
Really.
Absolutely.
That's it. And then now let's move on to the importance of resistance training. Yes. This is where I think many people go wrong because A, it's difficult. B, it's intimidating. So adherence is hard for a lot of women. C, who's got time for it? I can only imagine. You said you've got kids. I mean, you're going away this week. It's a lot of time, right?
Right.
Who has time to hit the weights? So best case scenario is setting up a gym in your home. But what does resistance training do? Well, it improves strength. We know that grip strength, is one of the risk factors for all-cause mortality. It increases muscle mass. Muscle is an endocrine organ. So we need this for longevity. But in terms of brain health, what happens is when you stimulate your muscle, you contract it, it releases something called myokines. Myokines are these muscle-based proteins. Once they go into the bloodstream, they go into the target organ, they cross the blood-brain barrier, if you will, they go to the prostate, they go to the liver, the kidneys, and they have positive effects on the brain. They can help your brain function better. They can help grow the brain. They can help with blood flow. They can help with the amelioration of amyloid beta, which is a hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. So you could paraphrase it and say that your muscles are the pharmacy and the myokines are the medications. So if you want the antidote or the elixir to brain health, it is exercise, in my opinion.
Very powerful. So the muscles are actually an endocrine organ because they are sending signals to the brain with the myokines that are secreted. And what specific effects do the myokines have on your neurons?
So let's take lactate, for example.
Sure.
Lactate is a molecule. It's a hormone, and that can help with glycogen replenishment. That helps with the way that we utilize our brain energy. So our brain is fueled by glycogen, but it's also fueled by ketones. Can be also fueled by lactate. So you get more brain energy. So your brain is able to produce energy at higher speeds. We have something called irisin. It's another signaling molecule that acts as a messenger molecule. So it actually helps with the expression of BDNF, which helps grow new neurons. It helps preserve new neurons. And it helps with something called synaptic plasticity. So we have something called synaptogenesis. So you can grow new synapses. Coincidentally, if you look at depressive-like symptoms in patients, or if you look at patients who have got major depression or even mild depression, they lose the ability for the neurons to communicate with each other. So you can get this natural antidepressant effect from exercise as well. The most exciting part right now, though, of this line of work, so I'm now just I'm on to my second systematic review, which is crazy if anyone's written one. It's a big process.
It's a bear.
But I'm actually looking at the relationship between exercise on cancer. And it turns out that just 30 minutes of exercise per day can downregulate 13 types of cancers and help prevent 13 types of cancers. And one way it does this is through natural killer cells. So what happens is when we are exercising at our maximum, I'm talking like going 85 to 90%, but you can also get it from aerobic training. 85 to 90% of your maximum heart rate, first of all, you're shunting blood through your system at maximal force. Now, if you have a tumor at one specific site in your body, we'll call this stage 1. That tumor is really intelligent. It needs blood supply, and it's a hungry little beast. And what happens is it gets blood supply. So it basically recruits these tumor cells. By the way, I'm not an oncologist, but this is what I've been reading and researching. It recruits these other tumor cells, and it basically says, guys, we need to take over the system being the body. So it pushes out what we call circulating tumor cells. These circulating tumor cells go and they try and migrate to another area of the body. That's what we call metastases. When one tumor site from one organ in the body goes to another area and metastasizes as it goes around the body. It turns out that maximal exercise can help ameliorate these circulating tumor cells. And it does this via natural killer cells. And Bente Peterson, she's a wonderful physician, endocrinologist in Copenhagen. And she was the one that found this, that during exercise, natural killer cells get shunted to the tumor and they kill them, because that's what natural killer cells do.
Right.
Okay, they go in and they kill the tumor. And she showed this in prostate cancer. So we're now seeing that exercise can help downregulate and inhibit the growth of tumors, but also once being diagnosed with cancer and you undergo treatment via chemotherapy, it can actually help the prognostic status of that.
So powerful. I mean,
isn't it?
The benefits of exercise on every system of the body cannot be overstated.
No, I know. And that's why we need to change the CDC guidelines to be at minimum 300 minutes.
I agree. Minimum 300 minutes of aerobic exercise and also a minimum of 3 days of strength training. But my kind of hack to strength training is I think everyone can get a set of 3 weights of dumbbells, and having dumbbells at home for me, like in between working every 45 minutes, I'll grab the dumbbells. I'll do some resistance training. I go to the gym 3-4 times a week as well, but I'm trying to get a little bit of resistance training in all day long.
Yeah.
Whether it be some Arnold presses or just, some squats with some dumbbells. I think a lot of people can fit that into their lifestyle because you don't need to make it, a hour and a half gym session. It just needs to be incorporated into your daily routine to have the maximal effect.
Correct. And so what I've seen in the literature as well, which is a caveat, which I hate, but it does turn out that you do need to be pushing at around 80% of your 1 repetition max.
Right.
1 repetition max is how much can you lift at maximal for 1 rep. So let's just say you can squat 100 kilos. You want your main sets to be around 80%, so it'll be 80 kilos. And you want to be looking at around 6 to 8 reps, 4 times. So that's a lot, but you just said something which I refer to as exercise snacks. And that's what I get a lot of my clients to do. I'm like, listen, 45 minutes of work, just do 5 minutes of exercise snacks. Just like get your heart rate raised to that level, because then you are shunting the blood.
Yes. And I think as we age, and that's so well said too, about the exercising to failure, if you can, during your reps is so important because that's what's really going to get you the increase in muscle hypertrophy and also strength, right?
Yeah.
But also the exercise snacks, like we were talking, like you and I are just mentioning, is another form that you need to add in throughout your day because the real core of why you need exercise snacks is to combat this epidemic of not moving that we have, sedentary behavior that we've all grown accustomed to.
Oh, 100%. Sedentary behavior from whether it's, just sitting there watching television, whether it's at work, we really need to redefine it because, in my opinion, sedentary behavior or inactivity is a disease.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. What is your definition of sedentary behavior?
What we're doing right now.
Exactly.
Zone 1.
Yes.
Zone 1, which is just
hours.
sitting here for hours, not
Right.
doing anything.
Right. I think the definition really is 30 to 45 minutes of being in one position without getting up and moving around.
Oh, I didn't know the actual time limit. Okay.
I think when you mentioned exercise snacks, that's my definition is 45 minutes. After that, you're getting sedentary. But there's huge studies, meta-analysis that show any hour you spend being sedentary over 4 hours is very detrimental to your all-cause mortality. So I say 4 hours is like sedentary behavior, which most people, they do. They get to work, they're sitting there until lunch, and then they finally get up and move around. And breaking it up with exercise snacks every 45 minutes has been shown to reverse the negative effects of being sedentary.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I love living in New York City, I don't think it's possible to do that. You get your step count in. And if people are thinking, Louisa, well, what about step counts? So the association between step counts is and all-cause mortality is really incredible. But we're seeing now it's not that 10,000 steps. It's actually 8,500. I live in New York. I'm getting around 20,000 steps a day. Now that I'm in LA, it's like coming down to 10,000. So you want to get your steps in. But also another good hack is getting one of those treadmill desks.
I have one.
You've got one?
I have one. I'm on it all day long.
Wow. I don't have one. Casey has one.
Yes.
I need to get one.
I get 25, 30,000 steps in.
Damn.
And honestly, it improves my productivity because continuous blood flow to the brain as you're sitting there you're not getting that continuous blood flow. But when you're moving constantly, that continuous blood flow is incredibly beneficial to your productivity, getting you in the zone, et cetera. So I love my treadmill desk. Would not give it up for the world. Let's move on to talking about sleep, specifically related to what happens in the neuroanatomy during sleep. What's happening at a cellular level?
Wow, sleep's phenomenal. I think it's one of our most underrated high-performance tools that we have. Any one of my clients that come to NeuroAthletics, which is my company, we measure them using an Oura ring. Some people like to wear the Whoop. It's whatever. We measure it. There's a strict rule. We have lights out at 10 p.m. If you don't adhere to your sleep protocol, it's doing me a disservice. It's doing the company a disservice, and we will just probably cancel the membership, right? Because that's how important it is. So sleep can be really broken into 2 stages. There's 5 stages, but I just want to talk about deep sleep and REM sleep. Deep sleep is stage 3, non-REM sleep. And this 2 specific things happen to the brain. One is we get the release of hormones. We get the release of testosterone. A lot of the testosterone in men is released during sleep. Deep sleep specifically, we get the release of estrogen. We also get the release of growth hormone, which means that sleep is the best recovery tool for your body. Something else that happens during this stage is I mentioned that we have neurons, the chief brain cell. We've got other types of brain cells. One of them is called the glial cell. And glial cell are our chief immunity brain cell, but they stick, but they're like glue, right? They stick between the neurons. What happens is during deep, slow wave sleep, they shrink in size. And when they shrink, it allows for cerebral spinal fluid to wash through the brain. And when it's doing this, it's taking the debris with it. We are exposed to so many environmental toxins throughout the day. Dale Bredesen speaks about this. We've got phthalates. I just learned about this actually quite recently. We've got phthalates and we've got toxins from the foods that we're eating. We've got amyloid beta that builds up during the brain. We've got BPA, all of these other toxins that build up and they accumulate in our brain. And so we have a chance of removing those via the activation of the glymphatic system. It's like a washing machine in the brain. So that's what happens during deep sleep. One of the primary reasons why you get brain fog is literally because you didn't get into deep sleep. Things that inhibit deep sleep are light exposure, stress, certain types of medication, and of course alcohol and marijuana. They completely obliterate deep sleep. Then we have REM sleep, and that's where it's an interesting aspect. I had to spend a lot of time in sleep studies doing a polysomnography. And you would see this synchronization during sleep of all of your brain cells. It was a really beautiful process. But during REM sleep, we see this, your brain is like an awake patient, right? But your body is completely paralyzed. And in fact, REM sleep is really phenomenal. I don't know if you know this, but there is something specifically associated with REM sleep and Parkinson's disease. You can actually pick up on Parkinson's disease 20 years before an onset of symptoms through something called REM behavior disorder, which is when you act out your dreams in a violent way, for example. So REM sleep is phenomenal. This is where we have our memory formation and the penetration of our learning takes place. So you want to be getting into REM sleep. And so they're the 2 stages of sleep that is really phenomenal for the brain.
That is so important for people to understand, specifically the Oura ring thing you said. So are you tracking their Oura ring at night from home and calling them if they're not asleep in bed?
We've got people on board. So lights out at 10 p.m. And that's specifically because we want you to fall asleep 2 hours prior to midnight. That's due to the proper release of dopamine. That's due to the proper functioning of your brain as per your circadian rhythm and Mother Nature. I hate when I get these clients who come to me, they're like, Louisa, I'm good. I've got 250 million under asset management and I'm doing 4 hours a night. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, I could make you a lot more money. I could improve your top line, decrease your bottom line if you just sleep an extra 4 hours a night.
Yeah, I think it's so important too with the tracking. And, a lot of people are against tracking because it's stressful to see the numbers sometimes. But that's what I think is key to work with someone like yourself or your team, where you have someone that's tracking with you and for you until you kind of get used to this. Because it's not just a number of hours. I see this all the time. I see people sleeping 7, 8 hours, but then you look at their sleep data and they're getting like 15 minutes of deep sleep.
Yeah.
And if you don't optimize the sleep stages and the amount of time you spend in them, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. Because like you said, so much happens during deep sleep. And many people spend such a little amount of time in deep sleep that they're not getting any of those benefits.
Exactly. And what we find, right, we have our physiological potential. That is what you have the potential at operating in. Let's just say that's 100%, okay? Most people are operating at around 55%. So we come in, what we do is we have a specific algorithm, and we do so many tests. Those tests go through an algorithm, they spit out your percentage of your physiological potential. Most people are getting at around 55%. I'm like, you're leaving 45% you're leaving 45% of your potential on the line there. So then if you want to talk about this in financial terms, multiply whatever you're earning right now by 45%, and that's the increase you can see.
Yeah, that's such a great analogy, especially for your audience there in New York.
Yeah, you can tell I work with CEOs, right, and hedge fund and portfolio managers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit more about the immune system. We talked a lot about cardiac health, and I think we've hit on hypertension as being a major factor in brain health. Also, the exercise, being able to modify cardiac muscle. Levine's protocol is amazing, by the way.
Oh, yeah, you knew which one I was talking about?
Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely. I think if you don't know Levine's protocol, I'll link to it in the show notes, but that's like the optimal exercise routine, actually, because you have zone 2, you have maximal cardiac, you have
was it 4
training.
hours?
I think it's 4 hours. I think you're right. I think it's 4 hours total.
Okay, so it wasn't 4 hours of
VO2 max and zone 2 exercise. But regardless, I think, having that variety of exercise is so beneficial in many ways. Your heart, especially, he showed, helping left ventricular function, getting it back 20 years, but also, like you said, with brain health as well. There's so much in there that is well done in that study. So we'll definitely link to it in the show notes. But moving on from cardiac health and moving kind of around the wellness wheel, let's talk a little bit about your immune system. You talked about natural killer cells, incredibly beneficial to understand what that is and how to improve it with things like exercise, diet. What about inflammation? Your immune system is responsible for inflammation. And I'd love for you to hit on that a little bit, how you work that into your patient conversations.
Yeah, so you've got your innate immune system, right? And this is the one that gets activated in response to inflammation, for example. But what's really interesting about the innate immune system is amyloid. Now, amyloid I mentioned. Now, I think a lot of people might be scared of Alzheimer's disease, right? They shouldn't be, because in my opinion, and this is controversial for me to say, but I've started to become more open about this, Alzheimer's disease in 2024 is now an optional disease.
I say the same thing, by the way.
Yes, and that doesn't, I put that to Twitter, and a lot of people were like, I'm unfollowing you. It's like, okay.
I know.
So
it is like, it's not optional for everybody. You mentioned there's a few genetic types that
around 2%.
2%. Very few people that get Alzheimer's are headed there genetically through major genomic disturbances. And that is not ApoE. But for most of the people, like you're saying right now, it is optional.
It is optional. Now, what tends to happen, and by the way, dementia is the umbrella term. Now, Alzheimer's disease is the major component because so many people are affected by it. We have 55 million people worldwide that have Alzheimer's disease. That number is said to triple by the year 2050. We've got some 6 to 7 million people in the United States that have it. And Alzheimer's disease is categorized as, pathologically, when you look at the brains of Alzheimer's disease patients, we see a buildup of something called amyloid. Now, amyloid beta, we've also got another part of it, which is tau. They're both proteins. So Alzheimer's, I'm getting to immunity, but Alzheimer's disease is a multi-proteinopathy. Yeah. It turns out that amyloid itself is an antimicrobial peptide. This basically, team, I call everyone team, so guys listening, this protein builds up in response to the activation of the innate immune system. So when you say, I'm under attack through stress, through inflammation, Your brain should be your best friend. It's there to protect and serve you. So it says, okay, Louisa's under attack. Let's raise amyloid to protect her nerve cells, to protect her brain cells. It builds up. But what happens is, if we don't clear it out during sleep, it just keeps building up and building up. So amyloid, being an antimicrobial peptide, being part of the innate immune system, means that there is somewhat a immune system insufficiency happening, if you will. So how do we correct that? Well, we have to correct it with practices that downregulate inflammation. But inflammation isn't the culprit. It is a molecule that we need. When we exercise, we get a flush of inflammation there to help repair the damaged fibers, muscle fibers, right? If we sprain our ankle, we get a rush of inflammation. What happens is, if we don't have good practices to bring that back down to base level, then we get chronic inflammation. One supplement, actually, which I hate turning to supplements, but there's great studies around this in humans, is rhodiola. Mm-hmm. So looking at adaptogens to help downregulate inflammation is fantastic. So I'm actually supplementing 3 times a day with rhodiola. Don't ask me about the dosage. It's on the back of the bottle, but I take it 3 times a day. Now, what happens is, because it's an adaptogen, what it does is it can modulate cortisol, which is the hormone that is released during when we're stressed, for example, and it can bring it back down to baseline.
So interesting. I want to double click on amyloid being a protein that our immune system is making in response to the insults that we're putting on our brain. So I think there's this misconception, mostly stemming from the pharmaceutical industry, that has demonized amyloid protein as the enemy. Like, we have to get rid of amyloid with drugs. And really, it's just our immune system trying to protect our brain.
Correct. And it's currently called the amyloid cascade hypothesis. It used to be called the acetylcholine hypothesis. Now it's called the amyloid cascade hypothesis. Hypothesis meaning that's what we think. And what disturbs me,
right?
What disturbs me so much is that we've made major advancements in cardiovascular disease, major advancements in cancer. We still don't know. And we're getting to the moon. We still don't know what causes Alzheimer's disease. And the latest drug, which is the FDA-approved drug lecanemab or Leqembi, is used to treat the symptom of Alzheimer's disease. So it is used to help clear out Alzheimer's disease. By the way, aducanumab or Aduhelm was taken off the market, but there is another one, donanemab. They're all monoclonal antibodies, but donanemab actually showed a brain atrophy component in it and more brain bleeds, if you will. So it's just detrimental. And it turns out that the average American will spend around $300,000 before they die of Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, it's crazy, on drugs that can increase their rate of complications like bleeds, when really, if you focus in on all the things that we're talking about, you're going to have a much more successful time, right?
Yeah.
So let's move on to gut health. How is gut health and brain health related?
Well, this is going to be super fast because it's not my area. However, they are. We have cranial nerves, which are the nerves that come out of the brain and brainstem, and they connect to different areas of the body. The 10th cranial nerve is called the vagus nerve, and that communicates. It comes out of the brain, comes down through your neck, and it connects to your gut. So your brain communicates with your gut. But surprisingly, so that's one nerve. So if we're stressed or we're anxious, it can cause some gut dysbiosis. But surprisingly, we actually have 10 nerves that come from the gut up to the brain. So what does that mean? That means what you eat affects how your brain functions. And like I mentioned earlier, when we're talking about nutrients, your brain and your entire gut loves fiber, it loves plants, it loves these phytonutrients and polyphenols. So we do have this direct relationship that can have a causative effect on brain structure, function, and how we feel.
Yeah. Eloquently stated. It might not be your area of expertise, but you said everything that people need to know.
Yeah. Eat the rainbow.
It's exactly. Eat the rainbow. Fiber, very important. Feed your gut bacteria. Make them happy. They're there to protect you and live synergistically with you, not just protecting your gut, but also your brain and protecting you from inflammation as well.
Yeah. And just for the ladies listening, there's one specific bacteria called the estrobolome, which is really important for us in terms of modulation of estrogen.
Let's talk about that a little bit too, because, one of the aspects I talk about with all my patients is their hormonal health. And so many people are hitting andropause, menopause, and seeing many symptoms, but many of the main symptoms that bother people are brain symptoms, right? Brain fog, not being able to think clearly, memory issues. And so how do you address hormonal changes in brain health?
Yeah. So we have to take everything into consideration. Okay. So when we talk about hormonal health, we have to understand, as it relates to Alzheimer's disease, why is it that 2 out of 3 patients of Alzheimer's disease are female? It means that we have a strong connection with estrogen. We have estrogen receptors in our brain. And when we reach estrogen insufficiency, when the ovaries no longer produce it, and that's what we call menopausal stage, we know that we've got a finite of time within that moment to either take HRT or not, hormone replacement therapy, for the health of our brain. And it turns out now that if we can monitor our hormonal health, and if we can get somebody in that zone of, maybe looking at hormone replacement therapy, it can help. It can help reverse, or not reverse. It can help with not getting Alzheimer's disease, if you will.
Yeah, especially for women. I think, the severe and steep decline of estrogen that occurs in most women with perimenopause leads to many negative consequences, increased rates of breast cancer, osteoporosis. But I think the brain health piece is missing from that conversation. I think the more we learn that hormone replacement therapy is part of the armamentarium of clinicians to help prevent disease, I think we'll see this reversal, hopefully, of Alzheimer's mainly affecting females more than males, a 2-to-1 ratio.
Absolutely. And what's interesting as well, which we won't go into a lot, we're seeing also a rise of unexplained infertility, which it's funny because we say unexplained. How can it be unexplained? But I see it as disruption of hormones, right? And I've seen a lot of women who have been classified as infertile. They come to us there, and I'm like, you're 35, you're fine. Eliminate endocrine disrupting chemicals, for example. Let's down-regulate inflammation. Let's get you sleeping and healthier, and then she's pregnant a month later. It's so hormones, to be classified a hormone, the molecule has to be able to communicate with another cell. That's what it is. So hormones communicate with one another, and that's all it is. It's like, let's just get your hormonal function in check, and you will feel better.
Yeah, it's so well stated. Okay, let's bring it home, and let's talk to patients now, or just people. There's different categories of people. I love talking about the bell-shaped curve, where everyone kind of falls somewhere on this curve of their current relationship with their brain, right? And so starting off with, I will say, the people that are biohackers, or the people that are, maybe they're younger and they want their brain to function optimally. These are the patients I see that come in, they're maybe in their 30s, they're really hitting their career stride, and they want optimal brain performance, focus, memory, what have you. They're asking me questions about things like nootropics. How do you talk to these type of clients?
Love nootropics, but the best one is exercise. Foundationally, we need that set. Surprisingly, a lot of things that, I'm seeing great research in, whether it's CBD, whether it's medicinal mushrooms, they're great as well, but they're just support, right? They're just there to support you. If you get everything functioning well, the nootropics are just going to be maybe a tiny bit of a boost. One nootropic that doesn't get spoken about a lot is choline. It helps with, obviously, acetylcholine, but B vitamins as well. Your brain needs B vitamins to function optimally. Where I would suggest everyone starting is doing a thorough blood test. When you come to NeuroAthletics, we do blood, sweat, urine, stool. We're checking your entire system. We're doing about 100 biomarkers in terms of blood work. We have a specific brain chemistry blood biomarker set that we do. So we can measure the levels of neurotransmitters. We can measure the levels of all these so-called nootropics in your brain, and we can enhance that through, I don't know if you want to take any form of medication or magic pill, if you will, but I'm not very bullish. I'm bearish on supplementation for the brain in terms of nootropics.
Yeah, but I think you said something really interesting. I mean, when you say supplementation, there's so many different categories of supplements, and there's some that are way out there with minimal research. But like you mentioned, things like omega-3 fatty acids.
They are the ultimate ones.
They're the ultimates, right?
I've seen people going into methylene blue. I've seen NAD, for example, IVs. If you're hydrated and you're doing everything functionally, we perfect your blood work, then that's it. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm a huge believer. We do a full blood panel when we see someone, because you just need to know where you're at, and there's no way to know that just by looking at symptoms, because symptoms are such a lagging indicator of what's actually going on under the hood in your biochemistry.
I will end that, but I will suggest people even experimenting with exogenous ketones as an energy source for the brains to produce energy over a longer period of time to withhold fatigue and feel better. Yeah.
Really, exogenous ketones. Is there a specific one you recommend, or?
No, I've been sipping on an actual liquid form, but beta-hydroxybutyrate, there's many different forms of it. If you just put it in your water, sip it throughout the day, it's fantastic.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I'm going to give that a try. Next category of people I see are executives in their 40s. They're experiencing some degree of brain fog. They are just not functioning as well as they would like to be, and they are experiencing memory issues. So they're, maybe losing their keys all the time, or I hear this all the time, I can't find the word to say what I want to say.
Language processing.
Language processing, right.
Yeah.
Where do you start with those type of patients?
So we do specific neurocognitive tests first and foremost, but it turns out that we use 3 letters. I'll tell everyone what the 3 letters, but it will give it away. It's F, S, and A. And these seem to be the 3 letters of words that people generally tend to miss. We've got 2 areas of our brain, which occurs on the dominant side of our brain, which is involved in language processing and language production. And these 2 areas, Wernicke's area.
Wernicke's and Broca's area.
Broca's area. See? There we go.
It wasn't a B, though. Yeah. Wait, F, S, and B?
F, S, and A.
Okay.
Broca's area. I was actually thinking of Bruce Willis as I was saying that. So they communicate with one another, and there seems to be a disruption in there as well in the communication between these 2 areas. So working on language processing as part of a neurocognitive training protocol actually yields phenomenal results. Really? Now, where do I think you should start? I think another controversial topic, I think everyone should get their ApoE4 status checked. You can get this. It's an easy, you can get your physician to order it. Then we can check, do you have an increased risk of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease? But generally, when you're thinking about Alzheimer's and cognitive impairment, we do start to lose our short-term memory. This could also be a sign of stress and sleep deprivation. So making sure that you're clearing out the amyloid beta during sleep, which is going to help with memory, with the brain fog. Make sure you're hydrating to help with the clarity of your brain. And you've got to be smart. You've got to eliminate alcohol. I'm sorry. Anybody that thinks they can get away with it and drink every day, that you're just doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, absolutely. On the brain testing piece, one of the tests that Dale Bredesen has online at mycognoscopy.com, it's like a 30-minute test. It tests memory, tests verbal processing.
The MOCA test, yeah.
Yeah, and I like that because it gives you a score. And even though the score, there's controversy around if that's diagnostic for anything. I don't really say it is, but directionality, I've seen it improve or get worse in people that are putting these habits into place, right?
100%. You can go from a level 18 to a level 30 just by putting these practices in place.
How do you implement the MOCA score in your practice?
Well, once we get it, they've got specific requirements on there. Like if you get a an 18 or a 12, that's indicative of mild cognitive impairment, which is a pre-dementia state. So at either point, we're putting, unless you get 30, we are putting in a protocol to help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important for executives or anyone that's feeling like their brain is not functioning optimally, is these tests are now available readily online. At least you have a number that can tell you when you need to start putting a protocol into place. And you mentioned ApoE. I'm a big believer in everyone knowing their ApoE status. Just to highlight the fact that just because you have an ApoE4 status doesn't mean that you will get Alzheimer's. It just means you have to be more aggressively protecting yourself.
Correct.
With a focus in on these type of therapeutics. Yep.
Aggressive lipid management as well.
Aggressive lipid management, absolutely. We skipped over that a little bit, but I'm a big believer in knowing your ApoB, your LDL, your fractionated LDL and the particle sizes, not just for your heart, but also for your brain.
Oh, 100%. What does your brain have? They have blood vessels too. Exactly. We don't want to occlude them. And also your Lp(a), which is the risk factor for cardiovascular disease, inherited risk factor.
Exactly. Yeah. Everyone needs to have their Lp(a) measured as well. So you have the 40-year-old executive. They're experiencing these lapses in vocabulary, memory, etc. It's just a full protocol like we've been talking about to help reverse, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, if I could get all of these people away from their current life and into, let's just say we go to the Maldives and I put you on this complete retreat protocol, the NeuroAthletics protocol, you'll probably feel better. So that means that let's just step back and think, are my behaviors helping with my brain fog?
Yeah. Absolutely. And you touched on something there too, because when you go to the Maldives, you're not stressed. You've eliminated a lot of the stressors in your life, both physical and emotional. And I feel like that's something that's not talked about a lot with brain health is how does your emotional health and your brain health, what is the interplay there?
Oh, gosh. Your emotional health and your brain health. Well, we know that there is a direct correlation between what we eat and how we feel, but also the functioning of your brain can dictate how you feel because then you won't be getting the proper release of chemicals such as serotonin. Even the release of melatonin can help how you feel because since melatonin is the molecule responsible for our sleepiness and when we get tired, if we block melatonin from occurring, you have to understand that falling asleep and staying asleep, there's two components, there's serotonin and melatonin. So melatonin helps you fall asleep, serotonin helps you stay asleep. So this is why we see sleep disruptions in patients with depressive-like symptoms or full-blown depression. So you have to think about it like an actual cycle. So you don't get the release of melatonin, therefore you don't sleep. If you don't sleep, you're not going to feel good the next day. And it's just this flow-on-flow effect. And it's the same with dehydration as well.
Yeah. Serotonin is such an important neurochemical, but mainly like it affects your sleep, your mood. And I think sometimes these emotional health issues that people are experiencing, whether it be depression or other emotional health issues, they directly lead to brain chemistry problems that manifest themselves as sleep. And those connections are sometimes not made, right?
Yeah, sleep, disruption, anger, frustration. I've got a lot of my clients who have got a short fuse, and generally I like to say that we have a disruption in REM sleep because REM serves as our emotional first aid as well.
Got it.
Yeah.
Oh, this is so interesting. Okay, let's move on to kind of the last group of people I see. These are patients sometimes maybe, 60, approaching 60, and now they're really feeling signs of cognitive impairment and perhaps their MoCA score is pretty low and they're very worried about Alzheimer's, or maybe they even have an ApoE positive and they're younger, but their ApoE gene status puts them at risk. What are you seeing other than the medications that are put out by the pharmaceutical companies? What are you seeing kind of more in the advanced, maybe treating people and helping them to accelerate their recovery?
Well, what we are really looking at is we've got a supply and demand problem here. So we need to supply the brain with things such as oxygen, blood flow, trophic factors. So we need to look at the supply first, and then we need to look at the demand. So right now, a patient like this will be experiencing more demand than it has supply. And demand is coming from lack of sleep, buildup of amyloid. Maybe they've got synapto loss, so they haven't got the regeneration of their the synapses. So we need to work on that. And how do we do that? We need to put aggressive management in place for lipids. So we have to look at that. And by the way, I'm not opposed to statins if in the case that you need to take a statin, right? We need to look at your hypertension. Do you have hypertension? We need to look at protocols for implementing good sleep behavior. We need to look at homocysteine. We need to be getting you on an aggressive exercise and sleep plan and nutrition plan. That's first and foremost. Then we can have a look at other things such as supplementing with choline. Maybe it may even be reducing meat intake, for example, or maybe just sticking to 90% plant and 10% meat or fish. So there's many different approaches we have depending on where they're at in the cycle, whether they've got subjective cognitive impairment, mild cognitive impairment, or actual full-blown Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, because now you have to become much more aggressive to slow the progression as well as hopefully stop the progression.
But I will say that I do go aggressive with sauna use as well because we actually have people now that can go out to your apartment and check for toxic mold. Yeah. And I think everyone should be doing this. We check for certain things in the air. We're even looking at carbon dioxide levels in the room.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think getting your environment checked for toxins like mold so important.
Getting an air doctor in the room I don't know, it's an air doctor which filters the quality of the air in the room.
I have one in my bedroom in my office.
There you go.
Yeah, you have to continuously filter. And, I live, in a relatively clean air environment, but still just having the doors and windows closed all day, that can be an issue inside your environment. And making sure that things like your air filters are changed and you've checked your home for mold, all that is so important. Just that brings up for me, just real quick on this topic too, is some of the new testing around beta tau protein, blood testing, amyloid tests. Yeah. How do you feel about those?
Love them and do them. Yeah. Is it PT? Yeah. I can't even think about it off the top of my head, but we do those tests as well to check for tau.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few of them coming out now.
Correct. So we can check for that. We're doing also the Grail test. I don't know how you feel about that. We're also doing an aggressive look into the arteries of the heart as well in 3D.
Yeah, the Clearly exam.
The Clearly exam, there you go, full body MRI. So we now have access to looking, deep diving into the entire body.
Yeah, I'm doing all of that too. And I think these new protein markers, the proteomics as it's called, is going to be a game changer for our diagnostics and especially for Alzheimer's, being able to measure and get an actual numerical level so you can see directionality, how the treatment approaches are working.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a game changer and all this is coming. And, there's going to be a lot of people poo-pooing it and saying it's not proven and this and that.
Of course. But remember, it takes 17 years.
Yes.
There is a lag time between when we discover something and when it's actually put out there to the market. So you may think right now, it's all just poo-poo, but in 17 years, it's going to be part of a vital sign, for example.
I totally agree with you.
I hope.
I hope too. It's kind of the same process we're seeing now with full body MRIs. They're getting cheaper, so more people are doing them. There are a lot of people poo-pooing it and saying it's not necessary or ineffective. And I think 17 years from now, one of the first things you'll do is go into a full body scanner and get fully worked up, right?
The one thing that we do, and I know we're going over time, so my area of expertise is in EEG, electroencephalogram. So I'm an intraoperative neurophysiologist, but trained as a neurophysiologist, which is the functionality of the brain, and we use EEGs, and that's what I use, and I love it. It's evidently it's an FDA-approved brain scanner, if you will, and we scan how well your brain's functioning. We can give you an entire map of the brain. We can tell you information processing speed. I can tell you your visual acuity. I can give you every area of the brain, which one's not performing well, which one is, and that's how we can get a real look at the functioning of the brain. But then you can do an MRI and couple it. We got the structural component, we got the functional, you get an MRA, we look at everything, and there we go. We have a complete cocktail, if you will, to give you.
That is so incredible. I can't wait till all of that is part of the regular workup for everyone.
Yeah.
You get so much more information. Combine that with artificial intelligence and machine learning, and
the future is bright, especially for your kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what an incredible conversation, Louisa. This is, I feel like we could just talk for hours and hours, of course, but I do want to end with a few questions for you. You're such an incredible wealth of knowledge. You live in New York.
Well, that's debatable right now. I actually live on Delta. So I live between New York and LA.
We'll have to have you talk next time about your methods to overcome jet lag and all these things. But how do people find you if they want to get involved with what you're doing?
Yeah.
How would they hear more?
Yeah, so one of the primary things that we do is we have a 6-week coaching certificate. So in order to shrink this mortality curve that's occurring in the world, I think it comes down to educating trainers, practitioners. We have a lot of PCPs taking the course. It's called the NeuroAthletics Coaching Certificate, which you can find on the website. It's an Australian website, neuroathletics.com.au. However, I hang out on Instagram a lot, so come and find me, Louisa Nicola.
Great. Fantastic. And then finally, I like to end with, tell me a little bit about your personal journey and where you're headed next.
Oh, well, I'm completing a body of work with the University of Washington, and I'm doing a lot. I'm doing around 6 different peer-reviewed studies, which involve really looking at the mechanism of action of exercise on mild cognitive impairment. So over the next year or 2 years, I'm heavy into that. I'm spreading the word of Alzheimer's disease prevention, and maybe there's a book coming out in the future. I'm not sure.
I can't wait. If there is, let me know about it. I'll be one of the first people reading it.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me on this podcast.
You are so fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to many more conversations.
Thanks.